In this video, we are going to deep dive into the most intriguing and forgotten moments of MMA's most polarizing fighter in the definitive Jon Jones Iceberg. Whether you're a hardcore fan or just curious about Jon Jones, this video is your ticket to rediscovering the hidden layers of Jon Jones' triumphant and darkest moments. The iceberg consists of 4 layers, with the first tier being the most known facts that even casuals are familiar with, down to the bottom of the iceberg, where only the most knowledgeable followers of the topic will know. We are starting off with Jon Jones' return at UFC 285. After his close unanimous decision win against Dominic Reyes, Jon Jones would stick around the light heavyweight division, teasing a potential matchup with Jan Blachowicz, but would eventually move up to the heavyweight division, a division that fans always wanted to see how Jones would be tested. He decided to bulk up for 3 years and made the move to heavyweight in hopes of challenging then UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou. However, he would go on to face Cyril Gane and defeat him in the very first round. This was huge for Jon Jones' legacy, as for many it cemented him as the greatest fighter of all time. The victory came after a string of disappointing title wins in his final days at light heavyweight, where it was clear that something was off. On May the 31st, 2020, Jon Jones announced on Twitter that he would be relinquishing his light heavyweight title. It was speculated that Jon Jones was unhappy with how he was being paid and treated by Dana White, but the truth was that Jon Jones felt that he was at a stage of his career where he wanted fights that would boost his legacy, and at the time he felt that he had nothing to gain from fighting top light heavyweight contenders Dominic Reyes or Jan Blachowicz, and that those two should fight each other for the vacant title, not wanting to hold up the division. At the time, Francis Ngannou was the king of the heavyweights, and a potential matchup between the Predator and Jon Bones Jones was possible. Jon Jones previously met Francis Ngannou while he was still a light heavyweight in 2019, and both men seemed to have a lot of respect for each other, but this all changed when Jon Jones moved up to Francis Ngannou's division. Both men wanted the fight, but unfortunately for us it never happened because Jon Jones needed 3 years to put on the weight to become a true heavyweight, while Francis Ngannou and Dana White's relationship fell apart, and Francis Ngannou would leave the UFC before Jon Jones made his heavyweight debut. After Jon Jones' successful heavyweight debut, capturing the UFC heavyweight belt, Francis Ngannou congratulated Jon Jones on Twitter, but reminded him that he is still the heavyweight king, which led to Jon Jones responding by calling Francis Ngannou a pussy. Prior to a PFL event on the 16th of June 2023, Jon Jones said that both him and Francis Ngannou, who were in attendance for the event, that he had no issues with Francis Ngannou and only talked shit to keep the fans excited in case of a possibility of both men fighting each other in the future. But he also made it a point to mention that if there was no fight contract between them two, then he had no beef with Ngannou. The most recent encounter between Francis Ngannou and Jon Jones was at the PFL vs Bellator event in Saudi Arabia, where Jones, who was in attendance, said that he believed he will beat Stipe Miocic, Tom Aspinall, and then Francis Ngannou. Right after this, Jones and Ngannou were pictured together alongside Mike Tyson. The history between Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou has looked to be a healthy competitive respect between both men, who believe that they are the baddest man on the planet. But after Francis Ngannou got knocked out by Anthony Joshua, we're likely never gonna get the fight. Up next, we have Jon Jones' failed drug tests. Jon Jones failed a pre-fight drug test for cocaine after beating better rival Daniel Cormier at UFC 182, but was not handed a suspension as cocaine is not banned out of competition by WADA. He apologized to his supporters and entered a drug treatment facility, but this wouldn't be the last time he would have issues with drugs. Jones would go on to fail multiple drug tests for androgen-related substances. The first came ahead of his rematch against Cormier, which was originally scheduled for UFC 200 in 2016. After serving a USADA suspension for the original violation, Jones would then test positive again in 2017 after successfully making a comeback to finish Daniel Cormier at UFC 214. Jones tested positive for turinabol, causing his win to be overturned to a no contest, along with a 15-month suspension. Jones returned after his 15th-month suspension at UFC 232 to finish Alexander Gustafsson via TKO 5 years after their first fight. The event was scheduled to take place in Las Vegas, but was suddenly moved to Los Angeles on a week's notice after Jones was denied a license to compete in Nevada due to a trace amount of turinabol in a pre-fight drug test. In 2019, Jon Jones' previous failed test results were no longer valid under a 2019 revision to the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency rules that increased the threshold for prohibited substances to 100 picograms. Jon Jones believes that his name should be cleared of any drug test failures and that his UFC 214 knockout win over Daniel Cormier should be overturned back into a win onto his record. Next is Jon Jones' most known controversy outside the octagon. Jones was scheduled to face #1 contender Anthony Johnson at UFC 187 in Las Vegas on the 23rd of May 2015. But Jones would be stripped of his UFC light heavyweight belt after news broke on April 26, 2015 that Jones committed a hit-and-run that hospitalized a pregnant woman but came back to grab some money from his car. Authorities said that the accident occurred in southeastern Albuquerque when the driver, who is Jon Jones, of a rented SUV ran a red light. Officers found a pipe with marijuana in the SUV as well as MMA and rental car documents in Jones's name, according to the police report. Jon Jones is arguably the best athlete in MMA history, and both his siblings, Chandler and Arthur Jones, were elite athletes as well. While Jon Jones pursued MMA, his brothers opted for football as the sport of their choice and also made it to the highest level of the NFL, both becoming Super Bowl winners. On December 5, 2009, Jon Jones faced Matt Hamill at the Ultimate Fighter 10 finale. Jon Jones dominated the fight from start to finish, and the fight was stopped since Matt Hamill was unable to continue. Everyone, including Jones, was shocked when Bruce Buffer announced that the winner of the fight was Matt Hamill due to illegal 12-6 elbows from Jon Jones. This resulted in Jon Jones' first and only loss on his record. 12-6 elbows were banned from the sport of MMA because they were deemed too dangerous by commissioners. Daniel Cormier is widely regarded as Jon Jones' biggest rival. It all started when Jon Jones introduced himself to DC by telling him that he could take him down as a joke. But DC wasn't familiar with Jones' weird humor and took it personally. Daniel Cormier was undefeated at the time and earned himself a title shot with a call-out after ragdolling Dan Henderson and choking him unconscious. At first it was just a competitive rivalry, but would later turn into a pure hatred when Daniel Cormier pushed Jon Jones at a UFC media day for UFC 178. Jon Jones would hand Daniel Cormier his first loss at UFC 182 in a great fight, and then would brutally finish his bitter rival with ground and pound in a rematch at UFC 214. Jon Jones was unstoppable. He held 6 title defenses in just 2 years, finishing all but one of his opponents. He defended his light heavyweight belt against Rampage Jackson, Leona Machida, Rashad Evans, Vitor Belfort, and Chael Sonnen. It truly felt like no one in the division could even draw blood from the champion. But then came in Alexander Gustafsson, who was an inch taller than Jones, and was an interesting style matchup. Alexander Gustafsson was coming off a 6-fight win streak in the prime of his career and had full confidence that he would be the one to dethrone Jon Jones. Despite the fact Jon Jones won a unanimous decision, the fight is regarded as Jon Jones' hardest fight of his career, and many people thought that Gustafsson should have got the belt that night, but Jon Jones would prove that Alexander Gustafsson was not on his level in the rematch. In a TMZ Sports interview in 2019, Jon Jones was asked if he saw any interesting prospects, and he mentioned Israel Adesanya, and one day that fans would want to see how they match up, in a respectful manner. After this, Israel Adesanya would respond by telling Jones to keep his name out of his mouth, and then the beef started. But then in 2023, Israel Adesanya said that he wanted to squash his beef with Jones. A month later, both kings settled their differences after crossing paths in Las Vegas and gave the fans a wholesome moment when they faced off, which can be found on the Free Stylebender YouTube channel. For many years, it was speculated that Israel Adesanya was scared of facing Jon Jones, and you could see from the face-off that Jones had a significant size advantage. Well, it would have been interesting to see what would have happened, but I believe Jon Jones would have mopped the floor with Izzy. On February the 8th, 2024, a YouTube channel by the name of Def Noodles uploaded a video called "A Very Drunk UFC Champion Jon Jones Heckled Me." It is unsure if this incident was recent or old, but regardless of when it took place, a very drunk Jon Jones was acting very sus, but it was likely the first time a heckler was actually funnier than the comedian on stage. I'm not sure if the comedian was aware that he had the goal in attendance, but he missed a great opportunity to make a funny joke at Jon Jones' expense, but maybe he was scared Jon Jones was gonna fuck him up. Back in 2012, Jon Jones made history by becoming the first ever UFC fighter to secure a lucrative sponsorship deal with Nike. The following year, Nike unveiled a special edition shoe named the Nike Free Trainer 5.0 Jon Bones Jones. Unsurprisingly, these shoes flew off the shelves, completely selling out within a mere 10 minutes. Nike also released a signature t-shirt featuring Jones, which experienced a similar success, selling out on its very first day of launch. The overwhelming support from fans truly showcased Jones' immense popularity. On the 4th of August 2014, Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier were involved in a face-off to promote UFC 178. But after Jones got too close to DC pulled a Chael Sonnen. Unfortunately, the fake Dana White, who was supposed to keep them separated, got overpowered by Jones and went flying off the stage, and Jon Jones and DC started brawling in the crowd. Jones returned to the stage and started screaming while DC had to be helped off the floor. Despite this being a great promotion for the fight, it was initially suggested that Nike and Gatorade terminated their contract with Jones due to his actions during the brawl, but this wasn't the case. According to Jones, a Nike representative told Jones that the Nike brand was simply moving on from MMA. Jones then called Nike to ask for his release, that later led to him signing with Reebok. Jones only had the Gatorade deal just for the UFC 165 fight with Alexander Gustafsson, and then Gatorade moved on from MMA, as Jones would remain the only athlete in MMA to represent Gatorade in the octagon. Jones initially was charged with domestic violence and felony vehicle tampering after an alleged incident at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas on September the 24th, 2021. After the UFC Hall of Fame induction ceremony, police were called to the resort early in the morning with a report of domestic disturbance and eventually arrested Jones outside the hotel. His fiancée told police that he put his hands on her. According to reports, he didn't strike her. He pled no contest to a misdemeanor charge of destruction of property with the value of $25 to $250, according to court documents. Along with a court condition to stay out of trouble, Jones was ordered to pay $750 restitution to the victim and get counseling for anger management. In the aftermath, Jones said that he was going to quit drinking and focus on his fighting career, but he was also banned from his longtime training home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Jackson Wink MMA. In the wake of Jon Jones' arrest for an alleged domestic violence incident against his fiancée, the former UFC light heavyweight champion was no longer allowed to step foot inside Jackson Wink MMA. The news was a major disappointment for Jon, who has $3 and even teaches a women's self-defense class out of the famed Jackson Wink Gym in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The close relationship between Jones and Jon, along with fellow coach Greg Jackson, has been well documented since Jones started training at the gym in 2009. Jon went out as far to say that he considers Jones to be like family. However, the continued years-long trend of Jones' legal troubles hit its boiling point with the alleged domestic violence incident, even for a coach who has been with Jones since the beginning. This was enough for Jon Jones to burn his bridge with Jon and move on to find a new home while bringing along coaches that he had from his old training camp. After celebrating his record-time defense of the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship, Jones noticed that he had a broken toe on his left foot. It was nearly off the bone during the first round, with Jones snapping his toe on a stuffed takedown around the 2-minute 40-second mark, as the friction from his toe on the mat tore it apart. Jones picked up on the injury during the post-fight interview with the UFC color commentator Joe Rogan, saying that he didn't register it at first due to the rush of adrenaline. Rogan immediately went for a stool to aid the champion, calling over a doctor as he asked Jones if he could continue to talk with him. Interestingly, Jones might have even lost his UFC light heavyweight title if he hadn't gotten the TKO stoppage against Chael Sonnen so early. Judging from the application of standard MMA rules, an in-fight injury that impairs a fighter from competing could result in a technical decision defeat or a doctor stoppage loss. Had Chael Sonnen made it to the second round, we could have seen the most controversial upset in UFC history. After the injury, Jon Jones made it mandatory to tape his toes together. For his return in 2023 at UFC 285, he used the UFC brand of tape opposed to the brand War tape that he usually used. When he started sweating, the UFC branded tape started slipping off. So he decided to make a cast around his toe that linked down to the middle of his foot so the tape wouldn't slip off. When Jon Jones approached the octagon, the commission told him he wasn't allowed to tape his feet. Jon Jones told them that he would always tape his toes and would refuse to compete if not allowed to do so. The commission allowed him to compete after removing some tape off his foot. Jones faced a battery charge over allegations he slapped a woman's pussy during a wild night out on April 19, 2019. The waitress told police Jones had been pestering her for a table dance before kissing up on her neck. The woman also claims Jon later came up from behind her and put her in a rear naked choke and then lifted her up in the air in what felt like a wrestling match. The woman reportedly claims she was serving Jones's group all night and that the UFC star was drunk and was being physical with her. Jones denied the allegations that he slapped the cocktail waitress, but pled no contest to a charge of disorderly conduct. Back in May 2012, Jones crashed his Bentley into a post in New York City. His late mother immediately posted his bail after he was jailed for DUI, driving under the influence. He pled guilty to the charges and paid a fine of $1,000. He also had a 6-month suspension on his driver license at the time. This is the first time Jon Jones would get into any controversy in his career. UFC 151 was scheduled to take place on September 1st, 2012 in Las Vegas, and was set to feature a headline bout between Jon Jones and Dan Henderson, with Jones' light heavyweight title on the line. However, with just 8 days before the event, it was announced that Henderson had blown out his knee in training, resulting in his withdrawal from the event. Injury withdrawals being a regular occurrence in the UFC, most fans simply expected the promotion to find a replacement for Dan Henderson. It was announced by Dana White that despite Chael Sonnen agreeing to move up to 205 pounds and face Jon Jones on late notice, that Jon Jones had turned down the fight. Despite Chael Sonnen being a more favorable matchup than Dan Henderson, Jon Jones was advised by his coaches to not take the fight as it would be too much of a risk since they would not have too much time to prepare for a fighter like Chael Sonnen. Dana White responded to this by calling Greg Jackson a sport killer, and this would be the first signs of Dana White having issues with Jon Jones, which wouldn't be the last time. In result of this, UFC 151 became the first ever event in the promotion's history to be cancelled. Dan Henderson went on record to claim that he had been in the best shape of his career for the fight. Jon Jones responded by asking Dan Henderson how he could be so confident when Jon Jones already choked him out, referring to their grappling match in 2016. The former UFC interim welterweight champion spoke about Jon Jones as a roommate on his podcast with Jim Nolan and Sam Roberts on the Jim and Sam Show. Covington recalled his unpleasant endeavors with Jones as he accused him of taking steroids. Colby Covington stated that he lived with Jon Jones for 2 years in Iowa Central Community College. He said that they were like best friends, but then Jon Jones started taking steroids and accused him of always having roid rage. He said that Jon Jones would come back to the dorm room and ask Colby to do the dishes. Covington also claimed that Jon Jones was using performance-enhancing substances to gain weight. Jon Jones wanted to wrestle in the heavyweight category while partying, according to Covington. Jon Jones responded to Colby Covington ahead of UFC 245. He called the welterweight a habitual liar. The former UFC light heavyweight champion also labeled Covington as a really bad person. He also denied ever sharing a room with him. So what do you guys think? Who do you think is actually lying here? When EA Sports UFC first launched on Android and iOS, it heavily featured Jon Jones, but developer EA Canada updated both versions to remove the promotion of Jones. Although he was still playable in the game, Jones allegedly ran a red light in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and struck a car driven by a pregnant woman. The woman, Vanessa Sonnenberg, suffered a broken arm in the crash, and Jones allegedly fled the scene on foot. Following Jones' arrest and subsequent release on bail, UFC President Dana White announced on April 28, 2015 that the organization had stripped Jones of his light heavyweight title and suspended him indefinitely. Jon Jones, who still appeared on the cover of EA Sports UFC's console versions, was removed from the start screen and app icon for the game on Android and iOS. Jones was still featured in one of the iOS screenshots and two of the Android screenshots that appeared on the respective store pages. Just hours before he became the youngest champion in UFC history, Jon Jones chased down a thief after they stole an elderly woman's belongings. Jones was scheduled to face MMA legend Shogun Rua for the light heavyweight title in 2011. In an interview with Cage Rider, Jon Jones revealed that his big brother Arthur, a defensive lineman for the Baltimore Ravens, gave Jones the scar in the middle of his forehead when they were kids. Jon Jones said, and I quote, "Arthur hit me in the face when I was a little boy with a Coca-Cola can. The first time the can exploded. The second time he hit me with a crushed soda can and I had cuts all over my face. The one that's in the middle of my forehead is a permanent reminder of my big brother." The Jones brothers were known to get into fights when they were kids and would often leave holes in the wall that would be discovered by their parents when their parents would return home. Jon Jones secretly being a fan of professional wrestling, even attending WWE SummerSlam 2014 and meeting Brock Lesnar backstage, spotted Dwayne Johnson, widely known as The Rock, and dapped him up before the fight. After the fight, The Rock congratulated Jon Jones backstage of UFC 214 wearing the champ's belt. Jon Jones raised the people's eyebrow in a great crossover moment for MMA and professional wrestling fans. It must have sucked for Daniel Cormier watching a legend from the Attitude Era celebrate with Jon Jones, as he is a huge WWE fan himself, but he was probably Team Stone Cold Steve Austin anyways. Initially, Jon Jones' fight nickname was Sexual Chocolate. Jones was introduced by that name in his pro debut. However, Jones would end up using the nickname he received in high school while playing football. Jones said this about his nickname, and I quote, "I was a football player that couldn't catch. I couldn't throw, but I was really tall and skinny. They put me on the defensive line with these huge shoulder pads and a really big helmet. When you look at my upper body, I look like a really big guy, but I had these little chicken legs coming out of the uniform, so everyone started calling me Bones, and my brother Beefy, so I kept the name." That's gonna be it for the Jon Jones Iceberg. I'm sure there were other interesting facts about Jon Jones, but I feel like this was a pretty complete iceberg. But let me know in the comments what I missed, and I'll see you next time.